Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very senior professional from Sacramento, USA, Amii Barnard Bahn. Amii, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's really pleased to be here.
Thank you. Amii is the founder of Barnard-Bahn Coaching and Consulting. She's been recognized as a top coach for legal and compliance executives. She's a former Fortune 50 executive. She's a contributor to the Harvard Business Review and a fellow of the Harvard Institute of Coaching. She's a lifelong diversity advocate, and she's an author. Amii, what an amazing journey you've had so far. So,
Yes.
so let's start talking about coaching and consulting. Tell me a little bit about Barnard-Bahn Coaching and Consulting and the kind of work you do.
Sure. I'd be happy to. Well, such as yourself, I spent about 20 years working in Fortune Global 50 organizations, and I worked my way up to senior executive roles, such as Chief Compliance Officer and Chief Administrative Officer and Chief Human Resources Officer. And, in the C-suite, I felt that the best way to be a respected leader and to successfully drive business strategy is to build healthy workplace cultures. And so in my leadership roles, I always hired an executive coach to support me in keeping it real, giving me feedback, holding me accountable, and to be the best that I could be for my teams and for my company. And so I got really inspired by that once I decided I had accomplished what I wanted to as an executive. And there were some other things that I wanted to do, such as write and teach. And coaching enabled me to have a little more freedom around doing all and speaking and doing all of those things. Because as you know, when you're a corporate executive, you need to be more you need to permission. You're always speaking. We are always speaking for the company. And so you, especially as a lawyer, by training, and an HR person, I usually managed and led those policies, and it can be a conflict of interest. So I just decided I wanted a little more intellectual freedom to be able to do the work and to support people who are in the roles that I used to hold.
Amazing. So, you decided to specialize in coaching legal and compliance executives. I'd like to get your perspective on what are some of the challenges you have worked with.
Yes, I love it because it is really challenging. And I feel like those roles are the corporate guardians of culture. And I would include audit and HR as well. I often coach in that continuum. They're often the first ones blamed and the last ones thanked. And they're overhead. Yeah. Right. They're not profit centers. And so they're vulnerable. And so I'm attracted to that because I think it's very challenging to be effective in those roles. And sometimes people can confuse technical expertise, especially attorneys, auditors, IT people as well, with relationships. I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review, which is, promotions aren't just about your skills, they're about your relationships. And I know you can relate to this, but at a certain point, you reach a technical proficiency that is good enough. And at that point, then it flips and your relationships become more important. You've already proven yourself. You've already made it. And all the certifications in the world,
correct,
beyond what you've gotten, aren't going to get you maybe to where you want to go. And you really have to know how to influence. You have to be self-aware of your impact on others. And you have to be a combination of humble and courageous to take the risks and to get the feedback, that you need and to hold yourself accountable.
How interesting. So you also have written about the Promotability Index.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what went into developing this and what are the 5 key elements to promote your career?
I started with an assessment and made it free and available to everyone because part of my values is leveling the playing field and making good leadership accessible to the most talented people, not the people who necessarily have the best head start. And so I created this assessment. It's 82 questions. It's on my website, and it breaks promotability into 5 key elements, which is self-awareness, external awareness, strategic thinking, thought leadership, and executive presence. And so these 5 in all my work and all my time and building teams and being in calibration meetings and promotion meetings and seeing who gets hired and who gets fired, that it came down to these elements. And then when I created the assessment, a lot of people said, well, this is great. We've assessed where where we're strong and where we are weak. But, do you have a tool to help us work on the things that you've helped us identify? And I said, and I thought, well, no, I don't. And that's what led to, and enough people asked, I thought, I could write a book about that. So it's a workbook. It's a guidebook. It has advice. It's intended to revisit over the life of your career, and organizations have adopted it as part of their performance career development, the positive, proactive, developmental side, as opposed to the looking back side. And it's given, people tell me that it's given them a shared language to use, because sometimes managers have a hard time giving feedback and it's hard for them to be objective. And so this removes some of the subjectivity out of it, which is another personal goal of mine, is to make sure that organizations do a better job of explaining who gets promoted and why.
Interesting. So, the first two elements you spoke about were about awareness. I wanted to ask you, how important is personal branding, which is also a very high degree of awareness of oneself, for promotability?
It is. And I know you've got that wonderful book, The Brand Called You. I'd say it's embedded in all 5 of the elements of promotability, as you can imagine. The ones that really stand out to me are executive presence, which gets to, do you communicate well? How are you perceived? How do you show up? How do other people experience you? And then also thought leadership is a key element. And so are you known for expertise both inside and outside of your company? And what is that? And do people know that? I would say that's probably a part of your brand as well. And then a lot of it goes to reputation. Too, right? Your brand is your reputation. And so that would be self-awareness and external awareness, 2 of the other key elements, which is, are you aware of why you do what you do? Correct. Self-awareness. And then external awareness, are you showing up the way that you intended? And is the impact that your actions are having on others, are you aware, or are there any blind spots? Very interesting. So, Amii, now let's talk a little bit about diversity. And I know you've done a lot of work in this area. Yes. Let me start by asking you that, there is a lot of talk about inclusion around the world. How much is actually being achieved? I think it depends on where you are in the world. If you're a woman in Afghanistan right now, you might not feel very included. In the United States, we've worked on getting women on boards, and I testified for the legislation in several states to require corporations to add women to their boards. You would hope that we wouldn't need a law, but it did move the dial on the number. So now we were at like 18% a few years ago. Now we're in the low to mid 20s, depending on whether you use the Russell 3000 index or which index you use, of the publicly traded companies, or the data that I'm sharing. And I think it's very different in India or the United States or anywhere in the world right now. But I would say that it's incremental. I would say the progress is incremental. It's incremental and in the right direction, I'm assuming. I think it depends on the country, but overall, yes. And the wealthier the country, I think there's a correlation between wealth and the ability to have the benefit of inclusion and diversity, because when your basic needs are met, if you go to Maslow's hierarchy of food and shelter and a safe place to be, those are primary. So once those are taken care of, then you can, I think, have the benefit, which we all strive for, and I hope for everyone in the world, that becomes easier once all those basic needs are met. So, when you were a C-suite executive, and, you obviously broke the glass ceiling to reach right to the top. I've been speaking to many, many women leaders from around the world, and I still get a sense that there are biases that exist in boardrooms and the societies that we live in. I'd love to get your perspective on how can some of these be mitigated or reduced? It's all about the relationships and the culture of the organization. Some organizations are going to be more intentional about appreciating some of the differences between the way women lead and men lead. And sometimes there isn't a difference, but there can be a perceived difference, or people may not be accustomed to seeing women in the boardroom. Some professions are very highly, female populated, such as healthcare.
Correct.
And health systems in general. And then financial services, on the other hand, would be an example of one that I think there are more men at the top, and there's more expectation of conformity of women's behavior. And then there's everything in between. You've got Hollywood, which you just have to be really good and people like you. You can wear whatever you want. You can say almost whatever you want. So when I talk to people who are talking about their careers, it's like, what's your comfort zone? How comfortable are you? Because there is always a bit of a degree of conformity. I think, like it or not, in an organization, the degree, what's your comfort zone? So
well said. And Amii, as a former top HR leader, where does the accountability for inclusiveness and diversity lie in a large organization?
At the top, the board can indirectly. The board has the power to demand the data and ask the tough questions.
Correct.
But they're not involved in the day-to-day. So ultimately, the CEO and president need to demonstrate through words and actions, again, who gets promoted and why. Right. And everyone is watching them. And if they say one thing and they do another thing, then, trust goes out the window and people say, okay, well, they're just giving lip service and they're just value signaling. And there's been a lot of that over the last few years, at least in the United States. I can speak more directly to that with Me Too and the Black Lives Matter movement and pay equity. If people aren't actually looking at pay equity, for example, which is it's very simple, but it's not easy, but it is simple. I wrote another Harvard Business Review article on how to do that. And so companies that are really committed to gender and racial equity can start with pay. There's really no other way to show that you care about treating people equally than knowing the person sitting next to you is paid the same as you are, based on performance, of course. Correct. But
correct.
So
correct. Well said. And my next question to Amii is on culture, and in the Fortune 50 organizations, I'm sure you've worked with multiple cultures because large companies have multiple cultures. Yes. How does culture impact DEI?
Well, it impacts it a lot because I think the way you would approach being more inclusive and the gaps that might exist would be different from country to country. It could be religious. It could be, there could be caste issues, right? There could be race issues as there have been, in the United States with our legacy, our history. So I think that having run large global programs, one of the most important things is to have a core set of values, but then really understand and get very localized in terms of what the actual needs and actions are. And I think listening to people is very, very important because it's not one size fits all. What works in the United States may not work in Japan.
Sure.
Right. I'm sure you had experienced that in your leadership roles as well.
Well said. My next question to you is now about the younger people, and when I look at it from my perspective at my age, I marvel at what a fresh perspective the millennials and the Gen Zs have brought into the workplace. And yet they are now getting into leadership roles in most large companies. I'd love to get your thoughts on how are they handling diversity, equity, inclusion with a very, very different perspective and mindset.
Yes, I have two teenage daughters, so we have a lot of dinner conversations around this.
Correct.
They, at least in the United States, have been privileged to grow up in assuming that everything is actually equal and demanding
Correct.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and demanding that they can be who they want to be in terms of individuality, which I would say is a companion piece to DEIB, but also can be separate. And so I think that it will be fascinating over the next 10 to 20 years to see if they can realize those dreams, because there's always an inherent tension between having an organization that's cohesive and individuality. And there are truths all along that continuum. And some companies do a really great job at allowing for individuality and still achieving their strategic objectives. Other companies believe that that's not possible, and they demand that you conform.
Correct.
And so it'll be really interesting to see, I think, over the next 10 to 20 years, as you've said, as they really move into these leadership roles. I see the tension when I'm coaching executives, and we have 5 generations in the workplace now simultaneously for the first time ever. So that is remarkable, isn't it?
Yep.
And so that raises tension. So when I coach executives, that's often like, oh, I cannot, I can't relate. How did this person just said this to me, or they've only worked for me for 2 years and they already expect to be a senior director. How do I keep them? How do I retain them? And tell them, look, you're just not there yet. You just don't have enough experience. And the younger generation is very impatient. And maybe we all were, but it seems to have accelerated the expectations.
Well said. Absolutely true. So, Amii, I'm now going to move to the next segment. My viewers and listeners love to get to know my guest a little better. So I have time for 2 or 3 questions for you, what I call personal questions. My first question to you is that, in a successful career like what you've had, and in a very multifaceted kind of set of roles that you've handled, what would you say are 3 key milestones or pivot points in your life or your career?
Great question. I would say I've been blessed with being able to pivot multiple times from being now an executive coach and author and speaker and lecturer, but starting out as an attorney and then pivoting to HR. So just that flexibility, and then being involved in civil rights issues, like working on the Americans with Disabilities Act back when I was at Georgetown Law School. That was a real privilege, lobbying that through Congress, and then the women on boards legislation in certain states. And then I would say my third is really having a loving family. I've been married for 27 years and counting, and I have 2 wonderful daughters, and I think keeping that in mind, as much as I feel so grateful for having had a very rich career, and I would never have been satisfied just being, not working, frankly. But I, at the end of the day, I would say that family is so important.
Wonderful. My next question to you, Amii, is who or what inspires you?
I would say my family and my colleagues, people like you, people who, I'm very fortunate to be part of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 coaches, and they inspire me every day. Marshall is amazing, an amazing mentor. And the work that everyone is doing, everyone who's in the group is committed to basically making the world a better place and giving back. All of us who were chosen to be in this group. And so we find different ways to donate our time or to be involved in, trying to make everyone's life a little bit better, and to remove obstacles and pain that exists in life. So.
Amazing. So I've got time for one more question. I was trying to decide what to ask you, but I think I'm going to ask you a question for all our viewers and listeners.
Yeah.
What would you say, Amii, are 3 lessons or life lessons you would like our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
Great question. I would say take calculated risks, number 1. And the earlier, the better, for a couple of reasons. Number 1, you have less to lose because you don't have a house and encumbrances like family and children, which are very important. And then the risk equation becomes different, right? The choices and the impact. And the second, do it early so that you remove fear. When I quit my law firm after graduating from Georgetown with student loan debt, people thought I was crazy. But I was very unhappy in my law firm, and I knew it wasn't the right thing for me. And I took a year off and I traveled in Asia. I got to visit India for the first time, and so my husband's family. And so I would say that the first one. The second thing is remember what's really important in life, and keep that close to your heart, because it can be easy to lose that thread on the road to ambition. And then the third thing I would say, especially the higher you get in an organization, holding yourself accountable and having truth tellers around you becomes more difficult. And I think you have to be very intentional about being humble and still being open to feedback, and being able to hear when you might be, we all have seen what happens when hubris takes over, and it wrecks companies, it wrecks lives, it takes away jobs, and value creation in terms of stock. And there's so many companies that have fallen because leaders get too arrogant and they hire yes people around them, and they no longer, I think they lose their way. So that would be my third piece of advice.
Well said. Well said. On that note of take risks, take it early, remember what is important and hold yourself accountable. What great lessons, Amii. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me at such length about the Promotability Index. And I'm going to ask a lot of our viewers and listeners to go and check out your book, The Promotability Index, on Amazon and whichever other platform it's available on. Thank you for talking to me about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And thank you for talking to me about your own journey. Thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was my pleasure.
Thank you again. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.